On a hot, dry Tuesday afternoon in the third week of August 1977, in the gravel dooryard of a 480-acre rolling Palouse wheat farm in Whitman County, Washington, 22 miles south of Spokane, a confident 47-year-old Spokane-based vintage crawler collector and restorer named Marv Faulk handed a 71-year-old Norwegian-Danish-American wheat farmer named Wendell Wen Sorenson a clean-printed Faulk Vintage Iron bill of sale, smiled the small, calculating smile of a Spokane man dealing with an older Palouse farmer, and offered him $1,200 in cash, today hood of the truck money, to haul away the rust-streaked old 1929 Caterpillar 20 crawler that had stood under a small canvas tarp behind Wen's red-stained machine shed since the spring of 1956. Wen Sorenson took the bill of sale in his square, work-hardened hand. He read it slowly. He read it twice. He did not say anything. What Marv Faulk did not know standing there in his fawn-tan Pendleton Western shirt on the Sorenson dooryard with a clean light gray 1977 Ford F250 and a tilt-bed gooseneck trailer parked behind him was that Wen Sorenson had been the unpaid secretary of the small Whitman County Threshing Bee Historical Association since 1953, had a steel filing cabinet in his back parlor with every Caterpillar parts manual the Peoria Works had issued between 1925 and 1942, and that stamped into the inside lower face of the rear frame rail of the rust-streaked old crawler under 3 layers of oxidized 1929 highway yellow paint was a small set of factory die marks that meant the 20 parked behind his shop was not a stock 1929 Caterpillar 20 at all. Wen Sorenson had been born in the front bedroom of the small white wood-frame 1912 farmhouse in May of 1906, the only child of a Norwegian-born wheat farmer named Olaf Sorenson and his Danish-American wife Inga. He had inherited the farm in the autumn of 1929 when his father Olaf had died at the age of 57 of a sudden heart attack walking back from the upper wheat field on a hot August evening. He had been 23 years old. He had farmed the same 480 acres for 48 straight years since. He raised winter wheat on rotation with peas and lentils. He milked 4 jerseys morning and evening for the household. He paid cash for every machine on the place. He had married a small, bright Lutheran schoolteacher named Helen Solberg from Endicott in 1932. He and Helen had raised 1 daughter, Marta, born in 1934, who lived now in Pullman and taught at Washington State University. The 1929 Caterpillar 20 had been delivered to the farm, new, in the second week of June 1929, a brand-new replacement crawler ordered by Olaf Sorenson, sight unseen, on a special order arrangement through the Caterpillar regional dealer in Spokane on the strength of a record 1928 wheat year. Wen had been 23. He had ridden the freight wagon down to the Colfax depot to meet the rail car himself. He had offloaded the 20 with the dealer's truck. He had driven it the 18 miles home to the farm in low gear in his father's place on the afternoon of the 11th of June 1929, the last machine his father Olaf would ever see arrive on Sorenson ground. Olaf Sorenson had died on the 17th of August that same summer, 10 weeks later. The 20 had been Wen Sorenson's main tractor for the next 27 straight years, from the summer of 1929 to the autumn of 1956, when he had bought a larger International TD 9-crawler second-hand from a small dealer in Pullman and had retired the 20 behind the machine shed under a small hand-sewn canvas tarp. He had run the 20 in those 27 years through the worst of the 1930s Palouse Depression, through the entire Second World War. He was deferred as an essential wheat producer for the Pacific Theater, through the heavy post-war wheat expansion of 1946 to 1954, and into the early years of the regional combine boom. He had loved that small crawler. He had also entirely on his own initiative, in his own small farm shop, in November of 1956, the day after he had parked the 20 under the tarp behind the shed, laid down on his back in the cool autumn dirt under the rear track frame of the 20 with a small kerosene lantern and a piece of plain newsprint and a yellow paper eagle pencil, and taken on a flat, clean stretch of bare inside steel of the rear frame rail, a careful pencil rubbing of a small set of factory die marks Sion had first noticed when he had been changing the lower track frame bushings in the summer of 1948, and had never spoken to anyone about since. He had compared the pencil rubbing that same November 1956 evening at the oak kitchen table in his own farmhouse with the careful diagrammatic drawings in the back of the early Caterpillar 20 parts manual he had ordered in 1954 directly from the Peoria works for the Whitman County Threshing Bee Historical Association Library, a slim brown cloth-bound 1929 parts manual that included on its very last fold-out page a single small confidential engineering drawing labeled in clean Peoria draftsman's lettering. Prototype frame configuration: A. Field trial units 1 to 4, February/April 1929. Not for production. Release die mark pattern 4-dot triangle plus PT-A stamp, rear rail interface, lower forward quadrant. He had laid the pencil rubbing next to the fold-out page. He had matched exactly the 4-dot triangle and the PT-A stamp. He had folded the rubbing carefully, slid it into the back of the parts manual, slid the parts manual back into the steel filing cabinet in his back parlor, and had not, in the 21 years that followed, told a single living person, not Helen, not Marta, not his closest neighbor, Earl Bjornstad, what the rubbing said. Marv Faulk was 47 years old. He had grown up in a small grain town called Reardon, Washington, 26 miles west of Spokane, the only son of a small-town farm implement dealer. He had taken over his father's dealership in 1962, sold it in 1968, used the proceeds to start a small vintage crawler restoration shop on the north side of Spokane called Faulk Vintage Iron, and had spent the previous 9 summers driving the rural roads of eastern Washington, northern Idaho, and western Montana, looking for retired pre-war Caterpillar crawlers parked behind machine sheds, paying Palouse and Idaho panhandle farmers a flat, low-fixed price for them, hauling them back to Spokane on his tilt-bed gooseneck trailer, restoring them to a clean cosmetic standard over a winter, and reselling them in the spring at the Hershey, Tulare, and Portland antique auction circuit for, on average, 4 to 7 times what he had paid for them. He had, by the summer of 1977, bought and resold 31 pre-war Caterpillar crawlers this way. His average profit per unit was $4,200. His Spokane shop carried the slogan, "We pay cash for junk crawlers," on its sign on Trent Avenue. He had driven down to the Sorenson farm that Tuesday afternoon on the strength of a tip from a small Whitman County implement dealer in Colfax, who had mentioned over coffee that the old Sorenson place south of Endicott has a 20 parked behind the shed from before the war. The old man retired it 20 years ago. He might let it go for $1,000. Marv Faulk had driven the 18 miles south to the farm without an appointment. He had knocked on the screen door of the 1912 farmhouse at 25 past 2. Wen Sorenson had let him in, offered him iced tea, listened to him for the better part of 15 minutes at the oilcloth kitchen table, and walked him out to the back of the red-stained machine shed to look at the 20. Marv Faulk, standing in his polished tan Lucchese roper boots in the dry Palouse Loess dust behind the shed, had walked twice around the rust-streaked old crawler. He had pulled the small canvas tarp halfway off the front. He had not, in the 20 minutes he spent looking at the 20, lowered himself below the level of his own waist. He had not, at any point, kneeled. He had stood, written on his clipboard, smiled the calculating professional smile, and said, "Mr. Sorenson, that is a tired old machine. The engine's seized, anybody can hear it from the way the flywheel sits. The tracks are shot, the paint's gone, the rest of it is rust. Faulk Vintage Iron will haul it away for you today on the trailer at no cost, and we can pay you $1,200 cash on the spot. As is, where is. Sign right here." Wen Sorenson took the bill of sale. He read it twice. He looked exactly once past Marv Faulk's shoulder, past the rust-streaked 20, at the soft slate-blue line of the Selkirk Mountains rising on the far eastern horizon in the late summer harvest haze. He looked back at Marv Faulk. He said mildly, "Mr. Faulk, may I ask you one question?" Marv Faulk said, "Sure thing, Mr. Sorenson." Wen said, "Have you, in the time you have been looking at my caterpillar this afternoon, laid down on the ground beside it and looked up at the inside lower face of the rear frame rail?" Marv Faulk smiled the small, condescending smile of a 47-year-old Spokane collector being asked a question he believed he did not need to answer. He said, "Mr. Sorenson, sir, I have bought 31 pre-war cats in the last 9 years. I do not need to lie down in the dirt to tell you what I am looking at. The frame's the frame, the serial's the serial. Will you sign the form?" Wen Sorenson folded the bill of sale exactly once along its existing crease. He handed it back to Marv Faulk. He said in his quiet Palouse English with the Norwegian-Danish edge, "Mr. Faulk, before you carry that clipboard back to your shop on Trent Avenue, you are going to lay down on the ground beside my caterpillar. You are going to look up at the inside lower face of the rear frame rail in the forward lower quadrant. You're going to read out loud to me the factory die marks that are stamped there under the paint. And then we are going to go back to the kitchen and have a second glass of iced tea. After that, I will tell you whether I am selling you my Caterpillar 20. Marv Faulk looked at Wen Sorenson for a long count. Then he did the one thing he had not, in 9 years of buying pre-war crawlers off Palouse and Idaho Panhandle farmers, ever done behind a machine shed in his clean, dark Levi's jeans. He laid down on his back in the dry, warm Palouse low-S dust beside the rust-streaked 1929 Caterpillar 20. He slid himself under the rear frame rail. He took from his shirt pocket a small chrome pen light. He turned it on. He looked up at the inside lower face of the rear frame rail in the lower forward quadrant, and then he reached up, with a small pocket knife he carried, and very carefully scraped a 1/4-inch by 1/2-inch patch of oxidized 1929 highway yellow paint off the bare inside steel. Underneath the paint, in the clean exposed steel, was a small clear factory die-stamped pattern, 4 small dots in a triangle, and 3/4 of an inch to the right of the triangle, 2 clean machine-stamped capital letters and a small dash, and 1 letter, PT-A. Marv Faulk read it twice. He read it a third time. The chrome penlight in his hand did not waver, but his throat did. He understood with the slow, cold understanding of a Spokane vintage Caterpillar collector who had spent 9 summers buying pre-war cats out of Palouse machine sheds, exactly what he was looking at. He understood that the rust-streaked old crawler in Wen Sorenson's backyard was not a stock 1929 Caterpillar 20 at all. It was one of the 4 February to April 1929. Peoria Works field trial production prototype units, the 4 serial 0 units the Peoria Engineering Office had stamped with the 4-dot triangle and the PT-A die mark, and had sent out to 4 selected Pacific Northwest wheat country dealers for confidential field trial use before the main 1929 production run had begun. He understood because he had read in the back of the 1970 Caterpillar magazine anniversary issue, the same paragraph every serious cat collector in the United States had read that of the 4 PTA field trial units, 3 had been recalled to Peoria in October 1929 and broken up for engineering review, and 1 had vanished from the Caterpillar service records entirely and had been listed in every cat collector reference book published between 1962 and 1977 as Field Trial Unit PTA4, Pacific Northwest, present whereabouts unknown. It had not been unknown. It had been parked behind Wen Sorenson's red-stained machine shed under a small canvas tarp since the spring of 1956. Marv Faulk slid out from under the rear frame rail of the 20. He stood up in the low-S dust. He brushed the dry, warm Palouse dirt off the back of his clean, dark Levi's. He did not that afternoon meet Wen Sorenson's eye. He said quietly, "Mr. Sorenson, I owe you an apology, sir. I am not going to leave the $1,200 form. I am not going to take the 20. I am going to drive back to my shop in Spokane, and I am going to call the Caterpillar Historical Division in Peoria, Illinois this afternoon, and I am going to tell my associates that I made a serious professional mistake on this farm this afternoon. If you will permit me, sir, I would like to come back when I have done that and apologize to you properly." Wen Sorenson said mildly, "Mr. Faulk, come back when you like. The iced tea will be on. The 20 will be where it has been since 1956. Marv Faulk drove the 22 miles back to his Faulk Vintage Iron shop on Trent Avenue in Spokane that afternoon, telephoned the Caterpillar Tractor Company Historical Division at the Peoria Works in Illinois at 4:45 p.m., and spoke for the better part of 40 minutes with the senior staff historian, a 58-year-old man named Robert Kettler, who, when Marv Faulk read him the wording of the die marks over the long-distance line, was quiet for a count of 5, and then said, "Mr. Faulk, do not touch the machine. Do not haul it. Do not clean it. Do not paint it. I am going to telephone the director of the Caterpillar Engineering Heritage Fund tonight. We are going to come out to the Sorenson farm in person inside of 72 hours." By the Friday morning of that same week, the director of the Caterpillar Engineering Heritage Fund, a 61-year-old man named Carl Voss, was sitting at Wen Sorenson's oak kitchen table in the 1912 Palouse farmhouse, drinking Wen's iced tea, with Robert Kettler beside him, with the slim brown cloth-bound 1929 Peoria parts manual open on the oilcloth, with the fold-out page of the confidential field trial drawing turned face up, and with Wen Sorenson's 1956 pencil rubbing laid carefully beside it. Marv Faulk, in clean, dark Levi's and a plain blue chambray work shirt, but no Pendleton, no bolo tie, and no condescending smile, sat in the fourth chair, hands folded on the oilcloth. Carl Voss had read on the long flight up from Peoria the full 1929 Caterpillar field trial file on production prototype units 1 through 4. He had brought in a leather briefcase a clean offer letter from the Caterpillar Engineering Heritage Fund. Caterpillar offered Wen Sorenson, on behalf of the Heritage Fund and the long-standing historical record of the Peoria Works, the sum of $36,000 for the 20, on the conditions that the original PTA die stamp pattern would never be ground off, that the machine would be preserved in its current unrestored 1977 condition in the Caterpillar Engineering Heritage Museum in Peoria, Illinois, and that Wen Sorenson would be credited, in perpetuity, on the museum plaque as the Palouse wheat farmer whose family had kept production prototype unit PTA-4 alive on a working wheat farm from 1929 to 1977. Wen Sorenson thought about it for a long count over his iced tea. Then he said mildly, "Mr. Voss, I will sell Caterpillar Tractor Company the 20 for $30,000. The other $6,000 of your offers you will pay to Faulk Vintage Iron in Spokane in a one-time consulting fee on the explicit condition that Mr. Faulk personally drives the 20 onto the Caterpillar transport trailer at the Peoria Works loading dock and stands beside the machine in the photograph for the Heritage Museum plaque. He found the die marks. He laid down on the ground. He gets the credit, too. Is that acceptable?" Carl Voss, who had been the director of the Caterpillar Engineering Heritage Fund for 14 years, said, "Mr. Sorenson, that is more than acceptable. That is exactly right." Marv Faulk did not say anything for one long count. He looked at Wen Sorenson across the oilcloth. He said only, "Mr. Sorenson, sir, thank you." Production prototype unit PTA-4 of the 1929 Caterpillar 20, with its original Peoria Works die marks still stamped into the inside lower face of the rear frame rail, sits today in the Caterpillar Engineering Heritage Museum in Peoria, Illinois. The plaque beside it carries Wen Sorenson's name, the date August 1977, and a small mounted black and white photograph of a 71-year-old Palouse wheat farmer in a sweat-stained pale cream straw farm hat, and a 47-year-old Spokane vintage crawler collector in a plain blue chambray work shirt, standing side by side on the Peoria loading dock the morning the 20 went into the museum. Wen Sorenson died on the Palouse farm in 1991, 85 years old, in his own bed, in the same front bedroom of the same 1912 farmhouse in which he had been born. His headstone in the small Lutheran cemetery north of Endicott reads, in plain eastern Washington granite, Wendell A. Sorenson, 1906 to 1991. He took the rubbing. Marv Faulk sold Faulk Vintage Iron in the spring of 1979, 2 years after the Sorenson visit, and spent the next 30 years working for a small, honest salary as the senior field consultant for the Caterpillar Engineering Heritage Fund's Barn Find Verification Program, driving the rural roads of the Pacific Northwest in a Caterpillar Highway, yellow Ford F250, looking for the kind of machine he had once almost hauled away for $1,200. He laid down on his back in the dirt under the rear frame rail of every Caterpillar he ever looked at again for the rest of his life. If this story stayed with you, there are more like it on this channel. Forgotten Machines, Quiet People, and the Work They Did. Subscribe, and we'll tell you the next one.